Of all the Xenos who challenged the Imperium during the Great Crusade, the Rangdan seemed to have been the hardest for them to vanquish. During this conflict, the death toll for the Imperium was staggering, with the Astartes and the Imperial Guard deaths at a combined figure coming in at 80,000. The Dark Angels, the First Legions, suffered such great losses that from this point going forward, they were always smaller in terms of numbers than the Ultramarines. Eventually the Imperium won. The question is, how did the Rangdan do so well against the Imperium? What weapons and abilities caused the Emperor's empire to really struggle to defeat them? And who led them? What did they deploy that could cause even a Primarch to struggle? There is no clear leadership named, and all the sources are very much small parts of a larger story that we've not been told. So, we know the Slog were there, eating the dead, left behind by the Rangdan, and their creations also stalked the battlefield. One of their constructs wants you to like this video to help the channel gain traction. We have a sliver of evidence the Slog were there in the following excerpt. Null had the dual distinctions of being the first master of ordnance of his legion, later known as the Warhounds, and being one of the first of the legion's officers interred within a dreadnought frame after being horrifically mutilated by Slog murder mines at Rangda. There are two races that are said to be Rangdan, the Ossivores and the Cerebvores. Now the Slog themselves love a nice bit of brain for their Sunday lunch, with gravy of course, and those other names have links to that idea. Ossivores being eaters of bones and Cerebvores, the cerebellum, implied with their names. So I think the Rangdan were a subspecies of the Slog themselves, thus the similar concepts, with the Slog being the masterminds, the power behind this Xenos race. So that's hierarchy in my opinion. What about them gain the attention of so many Primarchs when you look at the length of the conflict? In Alfieri's head of the Hydra, the Primarch is in the area during the third Rangdan Xenocide. He's there searching for his twin Omegon during the battle, and there he fights one of the Sloggoth. One of the Maggot Men was here. It was tall, closer to 3 meters than 2, with 2 arms, and what appeared to be 2 legs beneath its dark hooded robe. But any similarities it might bear to humanity vanished once you saw its exposed flesh. Its hands, one of which it clutched a corroded scepter, were both masses of maggots, and where the face of a human would be was simply a blank mass of writhing worms. It was repulsive, but it now had a hole in its torso the width of my arm, where my plasma pistol had burned clean through. Unfortunately, this appeared to trouble it not at all. It raised its scepter, and green energy played around the staff again. I sprang to one side as it fired the strange weapon, by means I could not discern, and I heard a hissing sizzle as a section of wall past where I had been standing was reduced to dust by the beam. I had no intention of chancing my refractor field against the Sloggoth's offence a second time, for such devices were temperamental at best. The Sloggoth lashed out at me again with its weapon. This time my refractor field did not activate, and although my reflexes were sufficient to ensure only a glancing hit, I could not prevent the energy beam from striking the right side of my chest as I threw myself downwards. The ceramite of my chest plate burned away in that millisecond, and the energy tore into my flesh. The weapon's pain was excruciating to me. Although I have been burned before by fire and by acid, this was as though the very molecules of my body were being ripped apart. I dropped my spear as my flesh burned away down to the bone and again suffused my arm. But even such Xenos spawn foulness was not enough to completely incapacitate someone created by the master of mankind, and I fired back. The Sloggoth were inhumanly fast and swayed aside from the shot. Although the plasma bolt took off its right arm halfway up, it seemed to pay the injury no mind and charged towards me as I staggered back to my feet. A hail of bolt shells erupted from my left as Hymar and Gukul opened up. The creature somehow flattened its body to slide under the shots, stretching out towards me and then snapping upright again before even I could properly react. I tried to bring my pistol to bear on it, but its damaged right arm reformed and seized my wrist to force it upwards. It swung for me with its scepter, and I blocked its arm with mine, yelling in pain as the impact jolted my abused flesh. I managed to grip its wrist with my right hand in the same manner as it had hold of my left. However, the Xenos was obscenely strong, and I was injured. Its flesh writhed under my grasp, and I struggled to keep hold of it. Then my helm began to flash warnings at me, at the same time as smoke started to rise from my gauntlets. The Slog was exuding some sort of caustic liquid from its own body, which was eating away at the ceramite. It would reach my skin in a matter of moments. To my horror, the thing made a sound that was an approximation of a human chuckle. "Time to die, meat thing," it hissed in a voice of mucus and rot, speaking mangled but recognisable low Gothic. "I will enjoy your flesh." So, we really get a sense there of the range of the abilities Slog can bring to even really test a Primarch. Remember, that's just one of the Sloggoth, and that's against a Primarch. The losses amongst the Astartes look more acceptable if you consider one can nearly defeat a Primarch. It's only in this battle when Omegon helps him and these bros tag team, the one Sloggoth, they really crush it and not struggle. Omegon enters the battle and holds the Xenos for a moment before he's knocked down by a green energy blast. The Sloggoth raised its weapon once more. Alpharis hurled the power spear, and his blade punched into its back. The Sloggoth did not keel forward onto its face, but it did stiffen and let out a gurgling sound of pain. Omegon flowed back to his feet, armour somehow undamaged by the Sloggoth's energy blast, and swept his spear in a diagonal slash. The blade seemed to howl, and the wound it carved through the Sloggoth vomited oily black smoke. The Xenos fell bisected, and the armoured figure stabbed it in the head for good measure. Then, when a dozen or more approached, the Primarch demigods of the battlefield left. Alpharis narrates, saying, "We withdrew rather than entering a battle that might have ended us." Now, think how some of those abilities that nearly let Sloggoth defeat a Primarch and Challenge 2 would stack up against a standard Space Marine. We know the Sloggoth possess a frighteningly advanced mastery of biomechanical technology and elemental psychics that far exceeds human and perhaps even Eldar capabilities, and with this knowledge they can also create constructs for the battlefield. They have two types of constructs in the main: harvesters and warriors. For the warriors, each moved in a skittering, hurrying gait on three legs of jointed metal that terminated in a sharp point at the bottom, while the tops blended somehow, seemingly into a pallid, stalk-like fleshy body in which sat a bestial fanged maw surrounded by whipping tendrils. These tendrils can sharpen to become harpoons that can get through marine plate, and the harvester, it appeared to be nothing more than a gigantic slab of flesh, bruised yellow and threaded with purple, that hovered above the ground by some means which I was unable to determine. On its back was a semi-transparent bulge. It had human heads the thing bore as part of itself, and what I would have considered its back a sack of decapitated human heads. Tendrils attacked from its form, and when it has you, it will drag you towards its fanged maw that can break through armour. They can also fire green energy beams from a distance that can cause armour to blister away. The Sloggoth, yes there's more, can also take on human skin suits. These are specialists called Destructors. Could one of them sneak into the Astartes ranks and get them to break their plan by attacking each other? Or perhaps, more alarmingly, cause conflicts between the legions that have been sent there, one in disguise, as a marine perhaps. The Sloggoth are also soulless beings who cast no shadow in the warp. Their mere presence acts to inhibit and disrupt psychic energy to such an extent that even humans with no psychic ability whatsoever grow uncomfortable and fractious around them. That's no soul, no ability, makes them a great counter to the librarians and psychics amongst the Astartes, and the normal advantage this would give them. Here's a taster of that. Gukul, a librarian, goes into the mind of a Sloggoth and gets Alpharis a moment to attack it by distracting it for him. Whilst the librarian does this, he screams when he enters the Sloggoth's mind. The librarian was prostrate on the ground after, his legs twisted under him where he had fallen. Highmore undid the neck clasps of Gukul's armour and removed his battle brother's helmet, revealing a face twisted in the after effects of agony. Eyeballs rolled back and blood leaked from his mouth, nose and tear ducts. No vital readings from his armour, Highmore reported grimly. It's as though everything shut down at once. I nodded sadly. He attacked the Sloggoth's mind to buy me a moment to act. Given his reaction, when he'd merely touched its presence earlier, he must have known what the cost would have been. It's fair to say this runs a little counter to the other law we just discussed about them being nulls. Perhaps that ability is within a particular type of Sloggoth, or the effect Gurkul feels in what it's like to try and get into the mind of a null, and that's why it caused him such pain. The Sloggoth can also absorb knowledge and experience as well by eating brains and then deploying that knowledge against their enemies. What if they use this to orchestrate their forms, eating Astartes' brains and learning their tactics to come up with counter-tactics to fight them? You could combine that and use it to deploy Sloggoth destructors for potential roles in the flesh of an Astartes. So those are the reasons within the lore why I think the Imperium of Man struggled to defeat the Rangdan. What do you think? And if you enjoyed this video on the Rangdan, maybe you'd also like this one, not on the Rangdan.